what I like about the church that I'm at is how objective it is. I'm being sanctified when I read the Nicene Creed, whether I feel it or not. And I'm being sanctified when I kneel and pray with other believers, whether I feel it or not. And I'm being sanctified when I take communion, whether I feel it or not. I'm being sanctified when I hear the words of absolution, which is my favorite part of the service.
Yes.
Where though the Bible says God forgives me, I'm a human and I'm dumb and I forget that. So I need somebody to look me in the eye and say, hey, I'm not God, but I'm speaking for him. You're forgiven.
Welcome to the City Square Podcast, where we talk with everyday people about faith and work. My name is Micah. My guest this episode is Mr. Zach Lee. He's a husband, father, former pastor, and works now in the finance industry. He's the author of the book, Logic for Christians, and is a former Baptist and now attends an Anglican church. Did I miss anything?
I think that's probably pretty fair. That's a pretty fair assessment, I think. Especially the last part.
So, yeah, thanks for doing this, man.
Man, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on. Like you said, my background, so I was in ministry for over a decade, primarily in Reformed Baptist circles. Got a couple degrees theology, and now am attending an Anglican church. I don't know that I'm convictionally Anglican, but I'm mainly there because the pastor's very Lutheran, which is a shout out to you and our friend the Wild Boar in the Vineyard. And so anyway, that's where I'm at now. I'm still kind of convictionally Baptist. There's some things about it that that there needs to be a slight reformation also in that. So anyway, that's where I'm at now.
Gotcha. And apologies, everyone. That was smoke going up my nose. So
that'll probably happen more than once.
Very professional start.
We have many vices out here tonight.
This isn't really a smoking show, but tonight it's the Espinosa Murcielago, and we've got some bourbon and some scotch on tap. So
awesome.
So yeah, well, you've been a pastor, as far as I know, in 3 different Baptist churches.
Correct.
So before we get there, let's go start at the beginning. Where'd you grow up? How'd you come to faith?
Yeah.
Give us the whole one.
Yeah, I was born in Plano, so shout out to Plano people. And I grew up, I don't know if y'all can hear me, there's airplanes above us as well. I grew up with really bad theology. So my dad was like old school Church of Christ, which is cannot be great in some areas. And then my mom was like TBN crazy charismatic. And so my dad's like, we should have no instruments in worship. And my mom's like, we need a heck of a lot more tambourine and trying to cast out demons at the table, when we're trying to have dinner and these kind of things. So it was really bad theology. And then I actually became a believer. Matt Chandler's mother and father-in-law moved in across the street from me when I was in high school. And so I was just this punk high school kid, like lifting weights in my driveway like a gangster. And they started inviting me to their church. And what was new was grace. I mean, I'd heard about the cross, I'd heard about the resurrection, but I grew up in a very works-based meritorious system, which I think a lot of us did, whether that was preached or not. That's what we kind of picked up by osmosis. And so that's what was unique to me. I was about 18 years old. And then immediately felt this call to ministry and wanted to do ministry. By the way, using that term call, I don't even know if that's a thing. And so that's just something Baptists say. I don't know that it's right. When Paul uses call, he typically talks about God's call on your life, not call like to go be a pastor. But wanted to do ministry, and so started studying for that. Went to school to study theology, and then took my first pastorate at a little Baptist church right on the border of the Red River. Had like 75 people on a Sunday, on Easter Sunday rather, and then pastored at the Village Church, which is much larger than 70 people. And then the last church I was at was in McKinney, and it was kind of a medium-sized church. So I've done small, large, and medium. I think medium is the one I enjoyed the most. But anyway, there's a quick flyby.
Gotcha. So you've been a pastor then at 3 different. And they were all Baptists, but they were all different stripes of Baptists, right?
Yeah, I would say so. The first one was Southern Baptist. The second one was still Southern Baptist, but of a much more, non-denominational feel. And then the last one was Reformed Baptist, but not affiliated with the SBC. We actually left the SBC due to some convictional differences after everything that had happened a few years ago in the convention. So, yeah. Good job. Yes, we made a good decision, I think.
Yeah, I'd say so. So now you are at an Anglican church, yet you are not convictionally Anglican.
Yeah, I'm out of ministry, mainly because I feel like I'm a bad Christian, but I feel like that's who the gospel's for. I'm attending an Anglican church. I'm not convictionally Anglican. I am on some things. I like that it's Westminster minus the legalism. So the Anglican, an Anglican pastor will sit there and have one too many drinks with you and tell a dirty joke with you and stuff, which you don't get with some of our Presbyterian brothers who have excellent theology, but also need to lighten up a little bit. And so I'm there, but I'm mainly there because the pastor is very Lutheran in his preaching. It's very grace heavy. It's not something that you do. There's hardly ever any sort of application to the sermon because the gospel is not something you do. It's something that's already been applied to you, which I really like. And he's already had to suffer for the faith. He was actually fired from his first parish. He's Canadian. That's really the only bad thing about him. And he was fired from his first parish because he would not do a gay liturgy. And so, I don't know, I mean, you're probably aware of this. The Church of England, a month and a half ago, decided to affirm same-sex marriage. And so our church did not comply with that, which I appreciate. There's a sense in which we have to save Anglicanism from the British. And so that's where I'm attending now, mainly because of those things. It's like a glass of cold water. So it's, I don't know, I'm a weird mutt. I also wanted to go to a church after leaving ministry. I got out of ministry just because I got super burned out. I also just wanted a place to heal, and I found something really encouraging about the liturgy because it's objective. So now I'm going off on a tangent.
That's what this podcast is for.
Good. I like tangents. I like rabbit trails. I like nuance. I like hearing myself talk. So much of evangelical worship is subjective. And what I mean by that is it's really about you, how you feel, what you can do, how you can do better, how you can put your best foot forward for Jesus. And so what happens is you go in and the worship's very emotional, right? It's this Hillsong kind of stuff. And the guy next to you is crying and you're not. So you're like, am I even saved? And it's subjective. And then the point of the sermon is almost works-based, to learn this lesson you can apply. And then maybe they tack on communion at the end, although the communion is super important. It should always freaking be there. What I like about the church that I'm at is how objective it is. I'm being sanctified when I read the Nicene Creed, whether I feel it or not. And I'm being sanctified when I kneel and pray with other believers, whether I feel it or not. And I'm being sanctified when I take communion, whether I feel it or not. I'm being sanctified when I hear the words of absolution, which is my favorite part of the service.
Yes.
Where though the Bible says God forgives me, I'm a human and I'm dumb and I forget that. So I need somebody to look me in the eye and say, hey, I'm not God, but I'm speaking for him. You're forgiven. And so there's something I found that's really helpful about the objectivity of liturgy that I didn't have in some of the low church settings that I came from. Now, don't get me wrong. I love all the churches that I got to serve at. A lot of my friends are strong Baptists. I'm still convictionally Baptist. I haven't fully progressed to where you are. I'm on that path, but I'm not there yet. And so I'm probably wrong until I get there. But anyway, that's kind of in a nutshell, how I got to where I'm at.
There are 8 planes per minute right now.
There are, yeah. Many planes out here. And so just know we're in a very popular city, obviously. Very cool. A lot of planes, a lot of travel. It's where you want to be.
Okay, interesting. I will say the absolution is something that freaked me out when I first heard it, just coming from a Baptist background. And I'm guessing it's pretty much word for word, but in the stead and by the authority of Christ, I forgive you your sins, is what I hear every Sunday. Yep. And now that's a huge comfort.
Oh, it's a huge... What happens is we have a tendency to be scared of things because we think they're, quote, too Catholic. Yeah. There's a problem with that because if you're a Protestant, you're already 90% Catholic. You disagree on church authority, you disagree on justification, but the Trinity and who Christ is and the authority of Scripture and all these things you already hold. And so I think Protestantism is at its worst when it's trying to be anti-Catholic. I think it's at its best when it's just trying to be biblical. And so all truth is God's truth, going back to a Catholic, Augustine, and even before him with Justin and other guys. But there's a tendency when we think of a word of absolution that it becomes Catholic-y. But the even in Catholicism, the idea is not that the priest is forgiving you; it's that he is being used as a mouthpiece to tell you what the Bible has already said about you. Because we're humans, and it's the same reason. One of the same reasons that God has ordained the sacraments. We should just be able to believe what God has done for us. But he's giving us things we can taste, things that we can smell, things that we can feel, like the water in baptism, to help our weak faith. And so it's ideas can be tossed around. They can be kicked back and forth. But eating something is very solid. And so, anyway.
It's objective.
It is. I like objectivity.
Yes.
For a guy who's always in his head, objectivity is helpful for me.
So... One of the accusations against that I've seen, I didn't really struggle a lot with assurance. A lot of people move from at least in my experience, they move from Reformed theology of some stripe, mostly Reformed Baptists usually, to Lutheranism, because I'm sure there's Anglicans in there as well. I'm just not as familiar. I'm more in the Lutheran scene, if you will.
Well, to be fair, most Anglicans are bad. So when I tell people that I'm going to an Anglican church, I have to say, well, wait, not ordained lesbian Anglicans, but historical, Orthodox, Reformed/Lutheran, inerrantists, those kind of things. So.
Yeah. The Lutherans have the ELCA as well, which is their den of vipers.
Totally.
Brood of vipers.
I have seen strange church signs for ELCA churches.
Yeah. Yeah, but I forgot what I was going to say, but it's definitely a lot. Oh yeah, that's right. The issue of assurance is one that comes up a lot as kind of the driving issue. A lot of times, people leaving traditions that have a tendency to focus heavily on like works-based sanctification, almost to the exclusion of the gospel, like the Paul Washer shocking youth message. You're not a Christian. You're not even saved. You're probably not saved. Why are you clapping?
Right.
It's like, well, I mean, now in a sacramental tradition, it's like, well, I am saved.
Yeah.
I was baptized.
Yeah.
I take the Lord's Supper every week. Oh, that's works religion. Well, no, but then the paradigms radically shift.
Totally. So. Yeah, there is a weird thing in most churches. Yeah, I think most churches is fair. Most evangelical churches, whether it's mainstream or just kind of pop evangelicalism, where there's heavy grace on paper. So every statement of faith is going to be very strong on justification being sola fide and God being the active agent in even sanctification and all these kind of things. But practically, and this is why liturgy is important, you don't just teach through your words. You don't just teach through your doctrine. You teach through your practice. And so practically, though, you better not drink and not smoke and not curse and not do this. And so what's weird is sanctification is not as big of a doctrine as like the Trinity or justification, but it's the one that we spend most of our lives thinking about and doing. Justification takes this long. Sanctification is what we do all day. So if you're off on that and it becomes works-based, your whole life becomes works-based regardless of what you're saying about justification. And so I think that's a common experience. People kind of have this progression where they kind of start in a Reformed Baptist circle. If they're past college age and they were burned in church, that's where they start. And that might be right doctrinally. I'm still wrestling with that. But then it burns you because you can't keep it because it is crushing. And according to Calvin, we should be getting better and better and better, the idea of progressive sanctification. Despite guys like King Solomon dying in idolatry and having 999 other women he sleeps with that are not his wife and still being saved. And so it crushes you. And so then you go Luther because you're like, there's grace here, and God, it's all what God has done for me, and the law's not something I'm supposed to be able to keep. It's supposed to crush me. And then that's still within the Western tradition, though, and so it's still judicial. So there's still penal substitutionary atonement and guilt and sin and condemnation. So then people go Greek Orthodox, and they just kind of throw all that judicial stuff out the window, and then they become an atheist. So I'm really just kind of step 2 on this progression, and hopefully I don't go any further than that, because I don't think the last 2 steps are helpful, but I think the first 2 steps are helpful. So anyway.
Is that inevitable, though?
I don't think it's inevitable. I've heard a Lutheran theologian actually who has a great quote where he says, you either embrace Luther, you go Greek Orthodox, or you become an atheist. Those are your only practical options, because one will crush you. The Luther's view of positional sanctification, which I would put in contrast to Calvin's view in the Reformed tradition of progressive sanctification, and we can drill down on that if we need to. It's a different focus. It's not that they're saying completely different things. It's a different focus, but that focus is everything. And so if you miss that, you will eventually come to a crisis of faith where you either try harder or you just throw in the towel. Or you say you embrace a tradition that says, this is meant to crush me. I like Lutheranism because it allows you to be a big sinner and have big grace. I can't do little sin and little grace. That's what most people are trying to do. They're trying to sin less, be holier, and then they need grace less. Mm-hmm. Despite the fact that Jesus says things like, I didn't come to call the righteous but sinners to repentance. Despite the fact that it's safer to be the whore that cries at his feet versus the Pharisee, we have a tendency to feel like it's safer being the Pharisee. And so there's a lot of peace that comes with being a big sinner, but knowing that you have a God that has big grace. So where I'm at is, either I can be a big sinner and God can just be super freaking gracious, or I can go to hell, but I can't do the legalism that I've done most of my life. Now, to be fair, this is not a fair caveat because I'm still more within that Reformed Baptist camp. Those guys would have nuance. Those guys would clarify. A lot of those guys, this is a caricature. It is a bit of a straw man. But I'm trying to, in using that, point out something that I think is important that we pass over, which is the key to sanctification is not focusing on sanctification. It's justification. That you will grow in holiness when you stop trying to grow in holiness and you just be loved. And so, anyway.
I have heard that I think one of the differences between like the Reformed tradition, one of the main differences, there's several that people point out. One would be for Calvin, I think there was a focus on idolatry and idols, and at least for some that came after him. And then for Luther, though, it was Christ on the cross. It was justification. It was his work coming to us, which is why he was so adamant and opposed to Zwingli.
Correct.
And people look at that now and they I don't understand. There's what's the big deal?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, big deal. How do you get forgiveness?
Yeah.
And for someone like Luther who struggled with what they call scrupulousness.
Sure.
That's a tendency I think I see in people who do have that struggle. They don't find that peace. Some of them maybe do, because maybe they're better than the rest of us.
Yes. I'm just not there. There are people better than me. There's so many more.
For sure.
Yeah, I think that so you pointed out something. So Luther has a huge, what is angst, or just the German Angst, same kind of thing. Luther has a very sensitive conscience. And so I'm not a sacramentalist. I understand Luther's sacramental position, though, because what he's trying to do is make salvation objective. He knows if any part is up to him, including his faith, he will screw it up. If any part of it is up to him, including his repentance, he will screw it up. If God demands perfection and I'm a sinner, if any part of that is up to me, I will screw it up. And so the objectivity that he's trying to bring is because I think he rightly understands what the Bible actually commands. Okay, so here's something I think interesting with Luther. We minimize biblical commands to make them possible. I don't think that they're meant to be possible. So the command is sell all that you have, and we say, well, give to the poor. The command is to be ye perfect, as God is perfect, and we change that to try to be perfect. That's not the command. The command is to let no unwholesome speech come out of your mouth, and we say, well, just don't say the F word. The command is to not even to look upon a woman with lust is committing adultery. And so what we do is we take these commands that are meant to be not difficult, but impossible, and we weaken them so that we can do them. So we can pat ourselves on the back and say, progressive sanctification, see, I'm being holier. Luther rightly points out God's commands are not meant to be difficult for the believer. They are impossible for the believer. You say, Zach, they're not all impossible. The command not to steal, I cannot steal. Luther would say that's not the command. It's to not steal while loving God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, perfectly all the time. Well, then I can't do that. Even me not stealing, I'm not doing it to God's glory. I cannot cheat on my wife, but I can't not want to cheat on her. And so I'm still sinning either way. So what Luther correctly understands is God's commands are impossible. And even the ones you think are possible because you have to do it with a perfect heart as a sinner are also impossible. What that does is that creates a sense of hopelessness in self and a high sense of hope in the cross. And that's the focus. So for Luther, there is this, and this is really big with him, as you know, the theologian of glory versus the theologian of the cross. It turns worldly thinking on its head, and the focus is on what Christ has done for you. It's all other-centered. Now, the Reformed tradition would agree with a lot of that. They wouldn't agree that all God's commands are impossible. There's a tendency when you read Calvin, when you read a lot of the guys that come after him, especially the Puritans. Everybody loves the Puritans, and they have some good theology in some points, but when you actually read them, they're really anxious about their own salvation. There is this focus on me getting better, me fighting idols. And so anytime you go down the sanctification route, there's a tendency to look at self and say, how do I get better? And Luther's not saying forget sanctification. He's saying, what if you just looked at Christ the whole time? It's not, what if I look at myself one time and even Christ 10 times? You're still looking at yourself once, which is a loss. You're a loser all the time and you suck all the time. So you don't have to look at self. That's already a given. What if sanctification was just looking at Christ and that naturally made you kinder, more gracious, wanting to help the poor, etc., instead of trying harder? So I think you're right. I think what happens with Calvin's quote, even about your heart being a perpetual idol factory, there's a tendency to always look in. Whereas Luther hates looking in because he just goes, yeah, I'm terrible. And when the devil accuses me, he actually hasn't gone far enough. when he says, when the devil accuses me, tell him I also have shit in my breeches. He is saying, I'm worse than even the devil condemns me of.
Yeah.
You don't get that kind of stuff with the Reformed tradition. You have a tendency to say, I'm a hopeless wretch, I'm a worm, so I will read more, and I will pray more, and I will fast more, and I will try to get rid of my vices. I read a frustrating article today by John Piper, who's kind of the evangelical pope. I'm not a big fan, no offense. By the way, to be fair, 90% of what he says is great. But it was an article on nicotine and caffeine and stimulants and these kind of things. And his article was basically kind of an Ask Pastor John, was basically, those things aren't sinful, but maybe you're doing them with a sinful heart. And so even on things that aren't explicitly sin, there's still the focus of, well, maybe you didn't have the right heart. Well, if that's the case, of course it's wrong, because your heart's always bad. So
I've heard variations on that. I forget who the source of this quote is, but basically it said, even your good decisions are sinful.
Yes.
I'm like, correct, but I also don't find that actually helpful to dwell on.
Correct.
That means you can do no good thing whatsoever. Now, granted, we can't do anything good to merit our justification.
Yeah, I think a clarifier on that is there are actions that are good or bad inherently, and then there's the heart. Meaning, eating ice cream is not inherently sinful, but you could do it with a gluttonous heart, and that would make it wrong. So the action, in that case, would be good or neutral, but you can do it with a bad heart. Now, there are other actions that are inherently bad. Cheating on your wife. No matter how much you love your mistress and you have a good heart for her, maybe you're even living a form of evangelism, so your mistress gets saved. It doesn't matter. The act is wrong in and of itself, even if you think you have a good heart. What I think a helpful clarifier is to say there are some things that are inherently sin regardless of your heart, but because your heart is broken, even the righteous things you do are sin. Not that they're inherently sinful. If I help a little old lady across the street, that action's inherently good. But because I do it with a heart that is not pure, I'm still sinning in some sense against God. I think that's a helpful clarifier.
So, looking back from when you started in ministry, 3 different churches. Over how many years was that?
A little over a decade. Yeah.
So you still hold many Reformed, if not mostly Reformed Baptist convictions. But how has your theology changed over from where you started now to where you are now?
I mean, I think the biggest way that it's changed is I've finally become comfortable with being a sinner. So much of my Christian life has been trying to not be a sinner, trying to be better. I've shifted dramatically into saying, that's not a reality. I don't get to not be a sinner. So what does it look like to sin and sin boldly, but trust Christ's grace more boldly still? What does it look like to have the focus more on, maybe God's just way more freaking gracious than I think? Like if I look through a lot of different people that I think are true believers, there's major sin in certain areas of their life. There is some severe doctrinal differences. You look at guys in church history, and it is a who's who of weirdos. And so maybe at the end of the day, God's grace is just stronger than we have a tendency to think that it is. And so I think the biggest change is I've spent most of my life committing the sin of legalism in an attempt to not commit sin, which is ironic. Now, it's not that I just throw myself headlong into sin. You still should fight sin. There's a different focus. I'm less scared of God dropping me. Maybe that's a better way to say it. For most of my life, it's like maybe I'm not in. Not that I lost it, right? But in the Reformed tradition, you can't lose it. It's perseverance of the saints. But if you're still not a good little boy, then you just show that you were never saved. So you still go to hell anyway if you're not good enough. And so it still becomes like a backdoor works thing. Yeah. Dropping that to say, maybe God's just gracious and maybe he'll sanctify me with or without my help. I don't know. It's very freeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if anyone wants to fact check Luther, just go read his small catechism where he goes through the 10 Commandments. And each one of them is, what does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we, and he really pulls what, I think maybe he was inspired by Jesus to say this. How in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus takes commands and inverts them and says, it's not enough that you don't commit adultery. You should not look at a woman lustfully.
That's right.
And that's what Luther does with the 10 Commandments. He says, thou shalt not steal. It means you don't steal, but also you promote the good of your neighbor. You help him in any way that you can. And
there's a positive element to every command, not just the negative.
Yeah.
Yeah, that there is this is a big difference in the Reformed versus Lutheran tradition, both of which there are elements I love. if I could make it as simple as possible, the two biggest differences are how they relate to law. By law there, I'm not using it the way that the Apostle Paul primarily used it. When Paul talks about law, ergonomou, works of the law in Greek, he's primarily talking about Mosaic law, Jewish works. That's why I mentioned circumcision and food laws and Sabbath. That's not the way that Luther uses the term law. He uses the term law for the way any of God's commands. The law is there to crush you. Those are what God has commanded of you that you can't do, and the gospel is what God has provided for you. That's his law-gospel distinction. So there are two main differences between the Lutheran view and the Reformed view. And again, these are caricatures. This is too far. It's easier to see the contrast if I push them to their extreme. So be gracious with me, Reformed people that hate what I'm about to say. One is, for Calvin in the Reformed tradition, the law is impossible for lost people, but it is possible but difficult for believers. Meaning, if you would pray more and read your Bible more and take more thoughts captive, you would lust less. For Luther, they're impossible, because the command is not to just lust, it's not to want to lust. The other one is what's called notoriously the third use of the law. So if you ask Calvin or Luther, why did God give us commands? They'll agree on the first 2 points. One, to show you his radical holiness. Two, to drive you to the gospel. They both agree with that. But there's a third use of the law that comes up in Calvin that's not emphasized by Luther. And that's that the law is there to make you holier. So Calvin says this explicitly, that God gave the law, quote, to spur you on as a whip does an ass, which he means a donkey, but I like to think that he doesn't. That's the Lutheran in me. And Luther would say, no, that's not what the Bible says. God did not give you commands to make you holier. When you read his commands, it makes you worse. It makes you want to break them, and then that makes you run to Christ, and that makes you holier. So, for example, the Apostle Paul says, I didn't even know coveting was a sin until I read, thou shalt not covet. And it produced in me a covetousness of all types. So think about what he's saying. He would have been holier had he not read the Bible, had he not read this command. He didn't read the command, thou shalt not covet, and say, great, God, I'm going to read my utmost for his highest, and I'm going to pray more, and I'm going to try to covet less. What he did is he read, thou shalt not covet, and he thought, well, that makes me want to covet a whole heck of a lot more. Luther's pointing out that God's commands make you want to break them because you're a sinner, and that's what the sin does in you. I mean, Paul says multiple times that God gave the commands that the trespass might increase. Think about that. God gives commands for the opposite reason that we give commands to our kids. I give commands to my kids so that they will obey and not jump on the couch or whatever it is. According to the New Testament, God gives commands to make us worse because it incites our flesh and it shows us how awful we are, so we run to Christ. And so they're both trying to get you to sanctification. And again, this is a caricature. It's unfair. Don't email me. You don't have my email address. You don't know who I am. I'm just some financial consultant now. But what you have is a focus in Reformed theology of getting better. They would hate that I said that, but that's what it is. With Luther, you don't have that. You have embrace how awful you are and know that God loves you. And by doing that, you will get better. And so they're both trying to attain sanctification. One is looking at sanctification. One is looking at justification. And I think you get sanctified by looking at justification, not sanctification, ironically enough. So anyway, again, I told you I like to hear myself talk, so forgive me for rambling. I don't preach anymore, so it just comes out at random podcasts with cigars and such.
This is it's not my show. It's my show, but not my show. So let's see. We've got some fun topics here tonight. We've got lots of stuff that happens on Twitter, which is always fun.
Twitter is a great social tool and a terrible place for theology.
Yes. Speaking of terrible theology, I saw he would probably be best described as a theobro. Probably one of your tribe. We're gonna lump him in with you.
You should. The worst people are in my tribe. They have some good theology, but some of the people I don't really adopt.
So he said the only time you should wear yoga pants are in your wife should only wear yoga pants in your house, working out at your gym while your husband watches you. Should not wear them outside the house ever. Agree or disagree?
I mean, I would disagree. I mean, well, first of all, I think your wife can wear something way better than yoga pants if you're in your house. I mean, if that's all you get, that's not a great marriage. I would recommend that. There's a great quote that I invented just for some shameless self-promotion, that there are only 3 good things to have ever come out of France: Bordeaux wine, lingerie, and John Calvin. And so lingerie being the best of those 3. And so, yeah, I would disagree. So that is here's the deal. If it's wrong and sinful for your wife to wear yoga pants out of the house, it is wrong and sinful for her to wear a bikini at the pool. Paul's commands about modesty don't go away just because we say wet lingerie is fine as long as it's at a pool. So what I see in a lot of the evangelical camps that I run in is this weird, we're going to make a command so that we're walking in holiness, but we're going to break it in 1,000 other places. If it's wrong for her to wear yoga pants, it's wrong for her to wear tight jeans that show her rear end off, right? So be consistent. And so that's what I'm saying. Either the rules will crush you and you have to look weird and Amish and wear no makeup and do all the things, or you just have to at some point say, gosh, I have to live normally in society, so I hope God is gracious. And so, yes, I think a woman can wear yoga pants. And if she can't and she's sinning, then she's also sinning and wearing a lot of other stuff. So I'm just saying it needs to be consistent. Yeah. Would the Apostle Paul let her wear yoga pants outside the house? No, but he'd also probably have her head covered, and he'd also probably not wear anything that's form-fitting to show off her curves or any of that. So either be consistent and be Amishy looking, or don't, and know that God's gracious. But those are your only two options. This thing is immodest, but this is not why, because your culture says that. You realize that Christians thought it was sinful for women to wear pants 60 years ago, like the majority of Christians in America, at least. And so, yeah, I mean, it's like when you talk about sexual ethics, and you realize in Victorian England they would cover the table legs because that was too scandalous for a man to see a table leg. And so at some point you have to pick and say, am I going to be consistent or not? And I've just realized there is no way to be consistent without being super weird. And so maybe God's gracious because, anyway.
In fairness to that guy, he's probably pretty consistent and slightly legalistic.
Totally, yeah, and he might be. But then the issue is not yoga pants. It's a whole lot of other things. I would say, does he allow a woman to go to the beach in anything short of a burqa? Something like that. So, which could be a drowning hazard. Let's be real.
Bill, get out of here. Dog wants to be part of the podcast too.
Yeah, y'all can't see. There's a German Shepherd here. There's thunder and lightning in the background. We have cigars and bourbon. It's a beautiful night. It's a beautiful night.
It's very almost Christian nationalistic.
Speaking of, that's a topic.
Yeah, that is a fun topic. That's another one that's been on Twitter. Okay, I'm curious then. We can do lightning round with these. Where do you fall when it comes to the complementarian, patriarchy, egalitarian?
Yeah. So I try to follow a rule in my theology, which is I try not to hold any view that's not at least 400 years old. I assume that if the Bible is God's word, and there are a lot of smart people studying it in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek for 2,000 years of church history, there's probably not a whole lot new that we're going to come up with today. There'll be nuances. I mean, that's the idea of a PhD and a dissertation. You have to come up with a new idea, a new slant on something. What you have in church history is you don't have women as elders pretty much ever, other than cults and weird things like that. They do serve in deacon roles, right? Diakonissa is the female term in Greek, and they're mentioned even at the Council of Nicaea. But they're doing serving roles. So they're involved, for example, in helping women be baptized so that there's no scandal in the water as you're trying to touch this woman. So it's helpful to have a female deacon there. They bring certain elements and ministerial support primarily to women. But you don't have what you see in modern day egalitarianism, which is a woman can be either a pastor or an elder, or she can teach or have authority over men. Most churches are asking the wrong question, by the way. I've seen a lot of people ask, can a woman be a pastor or an elder? And they're asking about English titles. So I even know a bunch of churches that are very dear to me that will have women not given the title pastor or elder, but they teach over men. They have authority over men. They're part of an executive team. We'll call them minister, right? We'll trick God as long as we use the English term minister or and director. Not these things, or director or whatever. But that's not what Paul forbids when he says, I don't permit a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man. He's forbidding two functions, two jobs. He doesn't say hold the English title pastor or hold the office of elder. It's not about that. It's about two jobs. Is she functioning in a church setting to have authority over men? Or is she functioning in a church setting to teach over men? And if she is, Paul's going to forbid that. A text can mean many things, but it can't mean its logical opposite. So whatever I don't permit a woman to teach or exercise authority means cannot mean she can teach and or have authority over men or something like that. And so, I think what you're going to get, again, in all of church history is the more patriarchy side. Complementarianism, I'm fine with. It just has to be defined and nuanced. I mean, I know churches that will say a woman can teach over men as long as she doesn't have the title elder, and they call themselves complementarian. Yeah. And so I think complementarianism doesn't mean anything anymore. What we should really ask, regardless of what terms we use, is what is the function, the job that this woman is performing? And if it's teaching or exercising authority over men within the context of the local church, we're not talking about in a job, we're not talking about as a teacher in a school, we're not talking about kids that women are told to instruct, then I think we're breaking those commands. And so does all of church history. Again, that's what church history is not scripture, But it is if you're going to overturn church history, you better say, I have a better hermeneutic than all these guys. If you could take 2,000 years of millions of Christians who have high education, speak multiple languages, etc., and you're going to say they're wrong, you can do that. But you better have a pretty dang good exegetical platform to do that, because you're overcoming quite a bit of resistance to say that. So I am much closer to the historical position, which are men and women are equal in value, role, personhood, etc. It has nothing to do with your ontology. God doesn't love a man more than a woman. He wouldn't rather save a man more than a woman. But when it comes to roles, specifically in the home and in the church, men are given the role of leadership exclusively. So anyway, I'm happy to drill down there. Again, I'm probably going to be listed in the He-Man Woman Haters Club, but I'm just trying to be a good historian. Again, I'm trying to not hold any view that has not been held for at least 400 years. Why, Zach, 400 years? Why not 500 something? Because the Baptist roots. I got to go back somehow to that. So I picked this arbitrary line of believers' baptism. So there you go.
Yeah, I was going to say, because we could apply that. I've got a couple of friends who I will needle about this.
Yes,
they'll be in favor of head covering or something like that. And I'll say, now do that with baptism. And they say, nope, I don't want to do that. Which is, it's all in good fun. But yes. Cool. Okay, how about soteriology then? We've got probably the four main camps. Calvinism, Arminianism are the two most popular to discuss online. But then you also have Lutheranism. At least these are Protestant categories, not Roman Catholic or Orthodox. And then there's also what could be called semi-Pelagianism, which is the free will Baptist kind of late flower soteriology.
You're right.
101. So where would you fall kind of in that category?
Yeah, somewhere between the Reformed Calvinistic and Lutheran view. I mean, Luther's explanation of the gospel and grace and law versus gospel, I totally agree with. When it comes to, when people say Reformed theology, they're typically, I mean, that's a whole camp. That includes everything from amillennialism to Westminster to all these other things. We're typically talking, though, about predestination. We're talking about tulip. We're talking about the doctrines of grace, and which I'm on board. I'm a 5-point Calvinist on all those things. I'm not Arminian. Yeah, I'm not Arminian, and I'm not obviously semi-Pelagian, and there I go again repeating myself, because that's kind of what Arminianism is in some camps.
It's definitely conflated.
Yes, so there's this thing, like when I was a kid and I'd watch like Scooby-Doo, they'd pull the mask off of the ghost or whatever, and it'd be like the mayor. I think if you pull the Arminius mask off, Pelagius is there. And so, I'm certainly not the kind of free will Baptist. You're not really dead in your sin, you're just kind of weak, and if we can just pipe up the organ hot enough, kind of second grade awakening, Finney you up here, sit at the anxious bench, you can make a decision for Christ. You're not spiritually dead. You're alive enough to make this decision. And that to me is ridiculous. You're dead. Yeah. And that's why I'm saying I'm between the first two, either the Reformed or the Lutheran, because both of them hold that you're totally dead and God does all the stuff. Now, again, I'm not a sacramentalist, but again, that's because I could be wrong. But I am a strong proponent in the fact that you are spiritually dead. Depravity is everything. You are spiritually dead. And so God has to do all the things. It's not a cooperation. You don't have a small part. It's not that God's sovereign over everything but your will. He's sovereign over everything. And so I'm certainly on the Luther and Calvin scale, and very much would attack the Arminian and especially anything semi-Pelagian, which, again, Arminianism dabbles in that. Now, I know how they get around it. The idea of prevenient grace. God, we're dead in our sin, but God gives everyone just enough grace to believe in their own free will. And why do some choose and not others then? Well, they're just better decision makers and holier, so for all eternity they can pat themselves on the back for the smart decision they made. That's ridiculous to me. And so I'm, with the doctrines of grace, I'm more Calvinistic, with the focus of the gospel being only on how terrible you are and how great God's grace is, I'm more Lutheran. So I don't know if that answers your question, or just makes it more complicated.
Well, I mean, it is. There are people who spend, I used to be one of these people, God forgive me. There are people who spend hours debating this online, and I feel like it's at some level the online discourse is kind of fruitless. So I've seen a few people move from one position to another, but more often it's just the hardening of their own positions.
People don't repent. That's not in vogue. What they do is they double down and they dig in their heels, especially if it's online.
Yeah.
So I remember, because I've got a background in philosophy, I remember a philosophy professor telling us the reason you debate is not to win the person. They're not going to be won over most of the time because that would be too humiliating. Think about how much repentance it would take to say, I've been wrong this whole time. What you're doing is you're doing it for the people listening to the debate. You're trying to win the others that are listening online. You're not really trying to win your opponent. And if you know that, it's a great tool. If you don't, then it's not helpful because you're just going to harden that other person in their position. So.
It took me like 2 years roughly of like study and thinking through things to come to a baptismal regeneration perspective. Mm-hmm. Not even infant baptism, but just baptismal regeneration. Because to come to that, and I was kind of kicking and screaming and against my will.
Totally.
Because that involved me saying, well, I've been wrong for 30 years of my life.
Totally.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I've been wrong on a bunch of things, and there's a lot of freedom in saying that. To say what happens is everyone holds their theological portfolio. See, now I'm mixing financial terms and theological terms. They all hold it with the same conviction, but you shouldn't. You should hold the Trinity, for example, very highly. I'm very confident that that's true. The resurrection, very confident that's true. When it comes to things like church government, baptism, end times things, it should be a little more open-handed. Not that you don't hold it, and not that the Bible isn't clear on those things. Not all those positions can be right. There is a right answer. But there's a difference between saying, I'm 60% sure this is right, which means you're still in anything over 51%, versus saying, I'm like 99% this other thing is true. And so we have a tendency not to have that nuance, but I think it can be a helpful nuance.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm getting attacked by bugs here.
Yeah.
It's these sweet lights. We got lightning, ambulance. You guys are getting the real stuff here.
Yeah, I don't know if they can hear that, but it's certainly happening. Fun stuff. Okay, so this has been a hot topic on Twitter. It's becoming kind of new battle lines, I think, in some of the reform camps. It's Christian nationalism. Now, we can dig in if you want a bit. There are a lot of different variations, of course, within that Christian nationalism framework. There's also, and these are all big categories, Christian nationalism, libertarianism, monarchy, fascism, classical liberalism,
totally.
Whatever we are doing in America right now.
Yeah.
Where do you fall, broadly speaking?
Yeah, I don't know that I want to say where I fall. What I'll do is I'll just give you some thoughts. I don't want to get pinned down. Even the term Christian nationalism is a somewhat new term. That's not the term that's been used for that topic traditionally. And so I'll just give you some thoughts around it. Kind of the two debates
in there as well.
Yeah, there's a few debates on this. So I'll just kind of give a smattering of ideas, and we can drill down on any of these. It all depends on who defines the terms. Whoever defines the terms wins the argument. And so if by Christian nationalism you mean America is a Christian nation, well, we can debate that. Were a lot of the founders Christian? Sure. Is America mainly Christian today? No. Does the Constitution literally give freedom of religion, which is explicitly saying we are not a Christian nation? Sure. If you define it that way, that's one thing. If you define it the way that most Christian nationalists would define it, which is not, we're saying that America is a Christian nation, but that there is no such thing as separation of church and state. There is no such thing as freedom of religion. That's a facade. At the end of the day, as soon as you say there's freedom of religion, and you say, okay, great, what about gay marriage? What about abortion? What about things the Bible speaks to? You're doing some form of Christian nationalism. And so I think it all depends on how we define it. I think the most shocking thing for me in the whole debate is there's this weird tendency to think Christian nationalism, and I'm not saying I agree with that or disagree with it. It all depends on how you define your terms.
Yeah.
There's a tendency to act like that is this new right-wing Trump, January 6th, post-COVID thing. To me, that's ridiculous because regardless of what you feel about Christian nationalism, the idea that the state should enforce Christian principles is the historic Christian position. You can disagree with it. You can say, I'm not a Christian nationalist. I'm totally fine with that. But to act like it's this new thing is infuriating to me because if you look at church history, you have, Constantine's Rome. You have all of the Middle Ages where the European powers and Christianity are completely linked. You have Luther's Germany. You have Calvin's Geneva. You have, wait for it, the Church of England. You have the Puritans, and they're sitting on a hill. You couldn't hold public office unless you're in good standing at a church. So to be really clear, Christian nationalism is the historic Christian position, whether you like it or not. So I just don't like people acting like it's this new right-wing weird thing. It's the normal historic position. But the pushback on that, and I think this is a helpful pushback, is to say, okay, if you want to do Christian nationalism, who's Christianity? If you want to make a law about, for example, baptism, do you do paedobaptism and you outlaw credo baptism, or do you reverse it and you outlaw? And so the problem with saying Christian nationalism is the same problem the theonomist has. We've done Christian nationalism and we've done theonomy. It was called the Middle Ages. Is that the type you want to go back to? What Christian power gets to enforce which rules? That's where it gets a little bit stickier. I think most people that don't like Christian nationalism are simply trying to say, let's not have Christianity worship America. Let's not do the Robert Jeffress at First Baptist Dallas, sing the Marine Corps hymn during a worship service. Let's not do the Jerry Falwell thing. And then those that are promoting Christian nationalism are trying to say there is no neutral. There is no freedom of religion. You either have Christian nationalism or you have pagan nationalism. But there is no neutral. And so to what I do is whoever I'm talking to, I just push them on that other side. So if I'm talking to somebody that hates Christian nationalism, I ask, would it be helpful if adultery was illegal? It's already immoral. Would it be helpful if it was illegal? Would that be a good thing that you would want? Well, yeah. Okay, well, look what you just did. You said this Christian principle, which has nothing to do with someone's freedom, but as a biblical principle would be better for society, whether they're Christians or not. And to somebody on the other side, I have a tendency to push them if they're a Christian nationalist and say, okay, let's say you're in power. What type of Christianity do you set up? And so I think what all Christians should be able to agree on is to say there should be a strong, if you believe, here's really the question, do you think God's commands are helpful for humanity, whether they're Christians or not?
Yeah.
And I think most Christians would say, if God's commands are for our good, which they are, then they would be good for people whether they're Christians or not. To not commit adultery is better than committing adultery. To not steal is better than stealing. To not assault somebody is better than not assaulting. These Christian principles are better whether they know it or not. In fact, I would go further and say there's not one command the Bible gives that's not better for lost people. Well, Zach, what about the command to take communion? Well, there's not a command to take communion. There's a command to be a believer and be baptized and take communion. And so that would be the command for the lost person. And so I think a lot of it is a lot of mudslinging.
Yeah.
And so you've got Christianity Today and you've got the Gospel Coalition and Patrick Shiner's article, and they're just really terrible on the Christian nationalism thing because there's not enough nuance.
Mm-hmm.
The bigger question we have to ask is, when the Constitution talks about freedom of religion, is that a real thing that God supports? Does the Bible say, yeah, whatever type of government you set up, just have that as a good thing? Or is that a bad thing? Would it actually be better if there was a stronger Christian influence in America or elsewhere? That seems to be the debate. And then how far do you go? And so to have the church worship America is a bad type of Christian nationalism. To say that America should be strongly influenced by Christian principles might be a type that's more palatable. But again, there just has to be a lot of nuance. I go back and forth. I don't like the term because I think it's incendiary and I think it's too political. So I like to talk about more of the issues. To what degree should Christianity shape politics? Should politics enforce certain things of Christianity, which, by the way, they already do. A lot of our laws are based on Christian principles. Not murdering is already an inherently Christian principle, right? So anyway, so that's a bunch of random thoughts. Give me your thoughts. Talk to me about, we can drill down on any of these if you want.
Yeah, I think that's completely accurate because that's what the debate is about. People don't know what that's what the debate is about. They say, oh, you want a white ethno-state because you're a Christian nationalist. And there might be some people who say that, but that's not the new stream of Christian nationalism that I've seen is one that is, are you familiar with Stephen Wolfe?
Yeah, his book by Canon Press, The Case for Christian Nationalism, he's kind of the poster child for it right now. And he's a Southern grad, which makes him in that Baptist camp, which I love and hate.
Well, he's Presby now, I think, right?
Eventually that's where you go. If you go Christian nationalism, you start going that way.
Yeah.
What's interesting is Westminster is explicitly against. So with the tripartite division of the law, which really starts with Melanchthon and then the Reform guys pick it up, they divide the law into civil, moral, and ceremonial, which I don't agree with. I think all the laws together, it's a chain. You break one, you break the other. If you cheat on your wife, you've broken a law in Israel that's civil. It's ceremonial because you need this cleansing and sacrifice. Oh, and it's moral. So I don't think the Bible makes that distinction. But if you take that distinction, the traditional Presbyterian camp is to say, well, we're still under the moral, but not the civil or ceremonial. The theonomist goes beyond that, and they say, no, we're also under the civil. And so, anyway, so it gets into, so he might have changed.
The Doug Wilson types used to be, he used to be a theonomist, but I think he has said he is no longer.
He softened a little bit.
Yeah, so, but he's also putting out a book that is called Mere Christendom, which I think is an attempt to bridge some of the gap, some of the divide there. Yeah. Because like one of our guests we've had on, her name's Carrie Baldwin, and she's a confessional Presbyterian who, funnily enough, goes to an LCMS church, but is confessionally holds to the Westminster, and she's a libertarian as well. Uh-huh. So she's got her own. We actually haven't been able to dig. We were supposed to have an episode with her where we talked about it, but we didn't get to. We ended up talking covenant theology for like half an hour. Or whatever.
I'm torn. I'm torn between saying we should enforce Christian principles, because then I say which Christian principles, and that gets sticky. There's not just Christianity. There are stripes of Christianity, and if you enforce one, you're going to infringe on the religious liberties of other people. But then the philosopher in me wants to be a classical liberal, which doesn't mean you're liberal politically today. It just means you believe in a democratic representative government. The government's not a monarchy. It's elected by the people. And so the humanities philosopher pro-Voltaire in me wants to be that. The Christian in me wants to fight against it. So I'm a mutt. It's nuance is the correct position. I'm not sure my nuances are right, but I'm sure that nuance is right. So
I think that's true, because the issue is what laws are you going to enforce?
Correct.
And
there's no Christianity. There are stripes of which Christianity, which Christian nationalism, to say it another way.
Yeah, I think that's really the debate, because the caricature, of course, is the Paula White, Robert Jeffress,
right?
Kind of the Pentecostal Trump orators, who are, some of them even saying that he's not the Antichrist, he's a reverse Antichrist, which probably makes him the Antichrist in their system.
Yeah. Correct. Yeah, it's what was so tough is Trump was such a polarizing figure, regardless of what you think about him, is it added a lot of confusion in Christian thinking, because you have a guy who's personally pretty immoral, but has policies, at least when he was in office, that benefited Christianity. And then you've got another guy that's also immoral who has policies that don't benefit Christianity. And so it gets into, even in the politics, do you vote for the person or do you vote for the policy? When you stand before God in judgment as a voter. So in the Old Testament, God...
If you vote.
Yes, if you vote. But sometimes there might be a reason to abstain or to vote third party. There's good cases to be made for that. But if you think of it this way, so in the Bible, in the Old Testament, God judges kings for their leadership. America is where you take a king and you divide it up into 300 million people. When you stand before God in judgment, will he hold you accountable for that 1/300 millionth vote that you had to try to enact righteousness based upon the person you elected or the policies they enacted? That really is the question that was kind of divisive in 2020 among Christians. There was this tear. So anyway, I don't know.
We don't get into like explicit politics. Not yet anyway. We're not big enough to, have our opinions be known.
Totally.
It's more
of a great way to get canceled.
It's the guest show, right?
That's right.
So we can just claim deniability.
That's right.
But no, that's very interesting. And I think you kind of drilled down to the actual issue there is, does the confessional Lutheran want a Pentecostal Seven Mountains mandate Christian nationalism? Well, no.
Right.
Does the Anglican want, the Puritan regular principle Christian nationalism?
Right.
No.
Right.
Presbyterianism, Anglicanism, Lutheranism might have more in common in some ways, but they're still very, very different in the execution of those things.
Anytime, yeah. And again, I can push on both sides. For anybody that thinks there's a neutral, there is no neutral. Christ says that, you're either with me or against me, with things that we help enact.
Yeah.
It's either going to be Christian or it's not. It's going to be informed by biblical principles or it's not. Excuse me. On the other side, though, anytime someone's a big theonomist or a Christian nationalist or whatever, I just ask, okay, so do you want a Roman Catholic Christendom? No, I don't want that. Okay, well, why not? That's Christian. Well, it's not the kind of Christian I want. Okay, gotcha. So how specific does it have to be?
Yeah. I will say, I haven't finished Stephen Wolf's book yet. But I think he makes the call for, he wants a broadly Protestant, probably a more, and maybe this might be fleshed out in Doug Wilson's book, the Mere Christendom. So I'm interested to actually read that one.
Yeah. And I would see what's difficult about saying broadly Protestant is anytime you get somebody to start defining major doctrines, primary doctrines, secondary doctrines, tertiary doctrines, they're going to disagree. So even when you say broadly Protestant, do we want a law about baptism?
Probably not.
But that would be broadly, and it would broadly be within the Paedo-Baptist camp. That's most of church history and most denominations, regardless of my own views. Yes, it is. Which, again, is the strongest case for it, is a bunch of smart people hold it, in my view. But doesn't mean I think it's right. I don't think it's right. But I'll get there eventually, I feel like. Again, if I keep being sanctified, I keep hanging out with you, I'll probably eventually get there. So
my track record isn't that great on convincing people, but it's fine.
It's fine.
It is what it is. Okay, so this next one would be Credo Baptist or Paedo Baptist.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still, though I'm at an Anglican, what I like about being in an Anglican church is they do Paedo Baptism, obviously, and they do it by sprinkling or effusion, but you're not required to. So if I joined a Presbyterian church, they would make me baptize my kids because they'd say I'm in sin if I'm not. The Anglican church will let me wait till they're believers and do it by immersion, which means they're inconsistent but nice. And so right now it's a nice place to be. And I realize there's an inconsistency there, but it's great because I can take the benefits. I like the high education. I like the link to church history. I like the liturgy. I like that our church is specifically conservative, and I like that they're Lutheran/Reformed, depending on what doctrine they're talking about. I'm personally hold to Credo Baptism. I mean, I'm a Reformed Baptist, so I have to have that label even. But I'm happy to dig down into specific issues around this topic if you want, but we don't have to. We can throw down, or we don't have to throw down. It's up to you.
Oh no, it's not. I mean, it's not a debate just because I'm not a good debater and I lose. So that's why I like the conversation more than the debate tactics.
Totally.
I've got some friends who they've done debates on King James. They've done debates on baptism.
Yeah.
And that's their wheelhouse, not mine. So.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay, cool. So, one of the big issues that I think in most conservative denominations, I can't really speak for the liberal ones, but most conservative denominations in the U.S. right now, anyway, there's a real pastor shortage.
Sure.
I think there's 6 retiring for every 1 or 2 that are coming out of seminary, or retiring or leaving or whatever. Some of that's probably due to burnout.
Same. I'm one of the statistics.
Yeah. So why do you I know you can't speak for everyone, obviously, but why do you think there's so much burnout in pastoral ministry in general?
Yeah, I mean, the statistics on this are really terrifying. It's something like 80% are out of ministry within 10 years. The average pastor's out of ministry within 5 years. 40-something% cheat on their spouse. 50% get divorced. It becomes really... you can just Google pastor burnout statistics, and it is terrifying. I think it's twofold. I think one is the job itself, and then I think the second thing is a cultural expectation that people put on a pastor that is not in the Bible. So the job itself is tough inherently. You're always under spiritual attack. You don't get paid any money. You're working nights, weekends. You're dealing with really difficult issues. I mean, suicide and drug abuse and adultery and all this kind of crazy stuff. There's no respect with what you do. You can get several degrees in theology, read Greek fluently, do all the stuff, and somebody will think because they Googled something they know as much as you. Everybody comes to you like they're an expert. And so there's the practical things that just make the job really, really difficult. And so that's one side. The other side, and this side was what was more crushing to me, is you also have there's this weird cultural expectation. I found in being in several churches at different levels as elder and pastor and all these different things, different levels, also guys that are underneath other guys. I've gone through the ranks. There's a lot of grace if you're a sinner, if you're a church member, but not if you are in leadership. If you want to be in leadership, you better hide your sin, and you better straighten your tie, and you better do and say all the right things. You're expected to be perfect. I mean, it's almost like being a cop. You're dealing with people at their worst, and you're expected to do everything perfect all the time. Not only emotionally, but not shoot the wrong person and not do this when you're scared to die and all these other kinds of things. And so, what's crushing is your life's always under a microscope. When someone comes over, do you have to hide your liquor or not? Do they know that you watch some sort of show or not? Can you say this word or not? And so what's weird is pastors are just regular people. In fact, they're worse. If you look at the psychological profile of pastors, the kind of guys that become pastors have big daddy wound issues, and they have insecurities. Carl Trueman, who's a church historian that I love, I think he's great. He has a great quote where he says, if you're a narcissist and don't want to put in the work to be a doctor or a lawyer, just be a pastor. And so there's there's a lot of that that's true. And so you're insecure, you're going in there, you're performing before people, and you have to be perfect on everything. Your life's under a microscope, your wife's under a microscope, your kids are under a microscope. If you drive home and you flick somebody off, you've sinned, you should repent. But that's it, nothing happens to you. As a pastor, you get fired. Now, I don't have all these people I want to flick off, it's a metaphor, but I want the option. And and so there's something crushing about that. And so I think the job is inherently difficult.
Yeah.
Add to that that most pastors are way underpaid. Their spouses have to get a job. I mean, I do financial services now. Over 80% of regular people cannot fully retire. Over 80%. Whatever we're doing is totally wrong. People should be doing smarter things. With pastors, it's even higher. Most pastors have to preach till they die because it's the only job in the world where you can have a PhD and make $60,000 a year or something. It's ridiculous. And so there's that natural, just difficult spiritual attack, etc. But then there's the expectations to be perfect on everything all the time. You don't get to be a human. Pastors are, like I said, just regular sinners, maybe worse. You're not being a pastor doesn't mean you're the godliest one there. In fact, you're usually not. I've got a buddy that's a pastor, and he is one of the few guys that is an exception to this because he's legitimately godly. He's a really good friend of mine. And but other than him, most of the godliest guys I've met are not in ministry. And so you're not the godliest guy. You might be smart. You might have good training, but there's probably somebody in the congregation that's smarter than you. And so anyway, so in my experience, it was, sorry, I think you got it. There's a moth or something attacking the cameras here. Anyway, so I think it's that combination. And then I think a lot of them are just so burned out now because, so I felt a little bit like I was sold a false bill of goods. Here's what I mean. So I went to study theology, and the professors are like, Bible's what matter. I'm like, yeah, Bible. They're like, truth, Bible, exegesis, do your Greek sentence diagramming, read your patristics, Bible. I'm like, yeah, Bible. And then I get to grad school. I'm doing philosophy, and they're like, truth, argumentation, logic. And I'm like, totally got you. And then I get to a church, and they're like, emotion, feeling, how you said this. Oh, we're being too political. Well, now we have to be political. So going back to the Christian nationalism thing, churches didn't need to be political 60 years ago because the biggest debate between the parties was Social Security. As soon as the debate becomes issues that the Bible actually addresses, gay marriage, transgenderism, abortion, etc., well, now you're going to have to be a little more political, whether you want to or not. This is why the Russell Moores and the Tim Kellers and these guys have kind of become cowards. They're thinking from 60 years ago. Let's not bring politics into it. We didn't. Politics brought religion into it. They started making the difference between the parties moral, not economic. And as soon as you do that, there is no neutrality. You're going to have to pick a side. And so I know several guys that have gotten out of ministry just post 2020. 2020 was a breaking point because most evangelical churches acted and I put stars and asterisks around this if I was typing it out, the exact same way as the lost unbelieving world. Churches did the same thing with COVID that the world did, the same thing with BLM that the world did, the same thing with the contentious election the world did, the same thing with Me Too the world did. There was no nuance. Nobody approached it from a Christian view. They just approached it in a way that was quote unquote winsome, which is our idol. That is our Baal or our Baal. It's our Astropoles or whatever. And so that breaking point, I know several friends have gotten out of ministry because even though they're doing everything right and the job's inherently difficult, now there's pressure from their elders, there's pressure from their people to not be a prophet, not say what the Bible says. That's offensive. Try to make it easier for lost people to love Christ, which is Pelagian to me. If they're spiritually dead, and the Bible says that they will hate us and that we have a stench of death, it makes no sense to say, let's be winsome. Let's make the gospel. There's just these little hang-ups. Let's remove those stumbling blocks. Either God will wake them up or he won't. Election's real. And so, anyway, now I'm ranting about politics. I'm getting older, so at some point you can just say, oh, just forgive him. He's an old man now. I've got gray in my beard. It's not wisdom. It's having a daughter. So, anyway.
Yes. Yeah, there's gray in my beard. And my poor genetics lost my hair. I think that's a good point about. I wonder if there's some level of like pragmatism that's obviously part of our culture. So you want people to like you. You think that if you're just nice enough, people are going to come. Oh, they're so nice. Like they'll just ask what the difference is because we're so nice.
Correct.
Like, well, are you familiar with I think it's Aaron Wrenn who wrote about it. He talks about the positive, neutral, and negative world. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not.
So he's speaking in the context of Christianity, saying, okay, Christianity in the positive world, Christianity is a net good, positive force. and that's how it's viewed in society. So that was America, back then. Then you got probably negative world showed up maybe in the 90s or 2000s, and now we are or that's neutral world. Sorry, neutral world would be, it's fine. Don't make a big deal about being Christian, but you're not being persecuted really. And then there's negative world, which we are /moving into, and there's obviously going to be variance there because there's a negative world in the sense the Islamic country is very negative for Christianity, totally. But there's active persecution and actual martyrs.
Yeah.
And then you've got where we are in America right now, which is the negative world.
Yeah.
Not outright, you're going to die for your faith, but Christianity is viewed as a negative.
Yeah, totally.
And I think that some people who are, like you said, the Russell Moore types, the Winsome Wars, the Nuance Bros, they view it as we're still in positive or neutral world.
Yeah, it's a Trojan horse. Okay, so what happens when you can't beat someone in an argument, when you can't beat somebody in content? What people do is they play the tone card. Okay, tone's important, but content's more important. How do we know this? Jesus' content is always true. His tone is not always nice. So biblically speaking, content is more important than tone. You can say a truth that's inherently loving in an unloving way, but the truth is still inherently loving. Even if you curse and yell at somebody, the truth is still true, and truth inherently is loving. You can also say a falsehood in a nice way, but that's inherently unloving because a falsehood is inherently unloving. And so what happens now is what people focus on, what most churches focus on, is not content. If you beat someone in content, they'll instantly switch it to you didn't say it nice, you're mean, you don't have the right to speak into my life, whatever. They'll find some way because they can't beat you at logic to try to make it something else. It's a red herring. And so what evangelicalism has done is something similar where they've said, okay, for example, I'll use the LGBTQ plus movement. What evangelical churches have said is, hold on, there's a June bug on me. What evangelical churches have said is, okay, we're not going to say that homosexuality is okay. On the whole, a lot of churches have gone that way, but most evangelical churches have said, no, we're going to say it's still sin. But we're going to apologize for the way that we said it because we want to make people happy and we want to give an inch to an evil movement. The problem with that is their frustration with evangelicalism and with Christianity is not how you said it. It's with what you said. Say it as nice as you want, be as nice as you can, have as many friends that are in a same-sex lifestyle as you can have. And at the end of the day, when you say, my worldview says, unless you repent, there will be judgment. That's what they're offended by. And so why would we say, well, we've preached against homosexuality in the past, but we were too mean? Do we say that when we preach against adultery? Do we say that when we preach against cheating on your taxes, whatever it is? No, we say sin should be condemned. And if you read the way that the Bible doesn't just give us content. It also expresses the way that we should say it. Jesus' example of how he talks is important as well as what he says. The way the prophets talk is important as well as what they say. But if you try to be a prophet and you try to say things in a strong way, you're thrown under the bus as being mean or bigoted. You're thrown in the camp of the John MacArthurs and the Doug Wilsons and the whatever. And so the issue, though, is a theological issue. We really think that we can make the gospel more attractive, not by lifting up Christ, but by being nicer and trying to not be political. And then people who are not dead in their sin, they're just sick, will see how great Christ is, and we've removed stumbling blocks. We've made it easy for them to believe. When you're dead, there is no easier to believe. You're fully dead or you are fully alive. Yeah. It's not the I'm not dead yet, well, you're mostly dead Monty Python thing. And so, anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. How about this? Lightning round here.
Okay.
Tolkien, Lewis, or Chesterton?
That's great. I like all three. Chesterton is the Catholic that most Protestants like and don't know that he's Catholic. Lewis is the one that most Protestants love and they don't realize that he's Anglican. So there's a shout out for Anglicanism with C.S. Lewis. He's also a great writer, etc. Tolkien, I believe, also is Catholic. So I've been to the Eagle and Child, the Bird and the Baby in Oxford, where they used to read their works to each other and debate. And so I'm probably of those three. Ooh, man, this is strong. If I have to agree with one or hang out with one, I think Chesterton is the most witty. I think he's the smartest.
Very incisive.
Yes. I mean, everything he says is a Twitter quote.
Yeah. Having
said that, Lewis is the one I'd most want to hang out with. There is a love for God that's infectious with Lewis.
Yeah.
Tolkien's I mean, with the Lord of the Rings here, he's obviously a brilliant writer. So I guess it just depends. So the philosopher in me wants to hang out with Chesterton, Lewis as a Christian, and then Tolkien in the fantasy world. But I'm not a big fiction guy. I mean, I read some fiction, but it's like Albert Camus' The Stranger or Voltaire's Candide. It's all these boring philosophers. I don't read for enjoyment of fiction. I should. Maybe that's why I'm depressed sometimes. So anyway, what about you? Of those three?
That's hard. One of the things I'm trying to do this year is get in touch with my roots, which are mainly English, Scottish, kind of. So that means reading more of all three. I'm Tolkien for the fiction, because I think his fiction is better than Lewis, even though I do love Lewis's fiction. A lot of guys are reading the Space Trilogy and finding it very incisive.
Mm-hmm.
So I would probably say Lewis, I think.
Good.
Yeah.
It's not a bad choice.
Lewis.
Lewis is kind of the poster child. Like, if you had to pick somebody for this podcast, you'd want Lewis.
Yeah.
For sure. But, I mean, he's a great thinker that dabbles in... He's not a theologian. That's why some of his views of apocatastasis and everybody getting saved eventually and stuff is wrong. But he's very likable. Anyway, so he's...
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I most want to share... If we're hanging out sharing a beer, it's Lewis. If it's, working on my Twitter feed, which has like 4 followers, probably Chesterton. I get those numbers up. But if it's just pure, as far as the fantasy stuff, I mean, Tolkien, I think, has that in spades over.
Yeah.
I think Tolkien's a better fantasy writer than Lewis.
Yeah, for sure.
No, not to disrespect The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but as a whole, I think Tolkien's probably a better fiction writer.
Yeah. Luther, Calvin, or Zwingli?
Oh man, certainly Luther. Because I'm sold out. Here's why I like Luther. Luther's the first honest person in church history. What I mean by that is, other people in church history talk about their sins in the past tense. So Augustine writes his Confessions, but that's before he got saved. Luther talks about how he used to be, but you get this idea when you read him that he's basically over. He's done sinning. Luther's the only one that's like, I hate God now, and I'm going to have a dirty mouth now, and I'm going to get drunk now, and God better be gracious. And so the reason I like Luther is because that's where I'm at. Like, I'm not, the faith has never been easy for me, and I've spent most of my life in legalism. I don't worship Luther. But if I didn't worship Christ, I probably would worship Luther. I'm a big fan. So I say that tongue in cheek. So yeah, definitely Luther. That'd be the one to hang out with for sure. Calvin would scold you for having too much fun. I mean, he's a better theologian. Luther's the firebrand of the Reformation. He starts it. But I do think Calvin's the better theologian in most other areas. I just think there's a difference between guys who are sinners in theory and guys, when you hear them preach, are sinners in actuality. You'll hear preachers and you think, that was a great sermon, but that guy kind of sees himself as a sinner in theory. He wouldn't say that, of course, but he is.
Yeah, well, he's got at least, most pastors probably have to project that.
They have to project that because we think that what the people most need to hear is how great we're doing, how sanctified we are. Here's something that was crazy. Back before I was a failed pastor, I wasn't a failed pastor, but it's funnier to say it that way. I would make some great theological points from the stage. I would quote something in Latin and tell some funny story and do whatever. That's not what most affected the people. It was when I talked about how awful I was. I'm fighting with my spouse. I have doubts. I'm depressed. There are days I want to kill myself. Maybe God's not real. People would come up after I'd say something like that, and they're like, that was more helpful than anything you've ever said. And so I actually think pastors should be doing the opposite of what they're doing. They should be showing people their humanity and how sinful and broken they are. Now, there are requirements to be an elder. I'm not saying that you just start cheating on your wife and you think that's fine. That's going to disqualify you. But people need to know how broken and sinful you are. That will give them way more hope than anything that you would say. And so I think most pastors do the opposite. They wear the kind of Superman cape and they act like they're a super Christian. Instead, if they just got up and they're like, hey, we're all Christians, but I suck and I'm terrible. But I'm going to tell you what the Bible says, and then maybe there's grace for me too. I think if they did that, that would be so much better.
Yeah. Feet of clay. Is that the...
Yes.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes, and we don't. We go all the way to the head of gold or whatever, using the Daniel analogy of the weird statue that's supposed to represent kingdoms for the end times or something.
Yeah. So, excluding Jesus, you can't pick Jesus. If you could have dinner with anyone living or dead, who would that be?
Oh, man. I don't know. I want to say something funny like Mitch Hedberg, but I don't think that would actually be a good dinner. Man, I don't know. Part of me wants to say, theologically, it'd be Luther, just because he's my guy. But I mean, if I'm talking anyone living or dead, it'd be some weird. It'd be like Genghis Khan, and I'd be like, what was it like to murder all those people? I don't know. So I don't know that I'm a great person to answer that question. I like Teddy Roosevelt. He had a big chest tattoo, and he, was tough. But I don't. I mean, theologically, it'd probably be Luther, because I feel like I could have too much to drink with him, and he wouldn't judge me. He'd pass me another beer. But I don't know. What about you? I've probably done most of my reading in Augustine. I mean, as far as a guy in church history that I've read the most of their primary work, it's Augustine, which is hard to read all of Augustine because it's like the equivalent of like 30 dissertations. He wrote copious amounts. And so, but Luther would be the one that would be the most fun to hang out with. Yeah. Tell dirty jokes.
I might say like Lewis, honestly.
Yeah.
Because I think that'd be just really fun.
Totally. I'd want to sit in his office while he had a pipe and him say something professorial, like, and ninthly, and he's got the patches on the elbows, something like that.
Jacket.
Yes, that's what you want.
Yeah. All right. Favorite reformer?
I mean, yeah. So I don't want to just sound like a Luther fanboy. I promise I read other people, and I actually disagree with Luther on so many things. That's why I said I'm not convictionally Lutheran. I don't agree with him on baptism, communion, and they're even getting to other tricky stuff that's more essential, like with the Reform and the Lutheran tradition, like the ubiquity of Christ's humanity. Christ is everywhere, the person, but is his humanity everywhere or not? Zwingli would say, no, that would deny his humanity. And Luther's like, yeah, he's in the elements, in, through, and underneath.
That's the major divide, I think, is actually Christology and the Reformation.
Yeah. So anyway, so I'm a big, as far as, I think the best systematic is still Bavinck. His 4-volume is, I think, the best that's ever been written. I think it's Bavinck number 1, and then I think Calvin's Institutes are number 2. If you want a full-fledged system of theology, their focus when it comes to the thing we most spend our lives on, like I said, which is the sanctification piece, leads me to want to slit my wrists. And so there is something freeing with Luther to say, Luther's quote about how when you're feeling condemned, instead of trying harder, what you should do is laugh or sport or recreate yourself or even sin a little to spite the devil. There's something really freeing in that. When you're trying to walk in holiness and you just feel condemned, the Reformed tradition says, yes, try more religious things. Read your Bible more, pray more, fast more, whatever. Luther's like, you should have another drink and you should sin a little bit, just so you remind yourself that you're not going to hell. That's a different way of approaching theology. And it sounds scandalous. It sounds so dangerous. But the irony is I actually think it makes you sin less in the long run. And so, anyway, I'm happy to drill down on that last comment because that sounded like I was promoting sin, and maybe I am. And so,
favorite church father?
I mean, if Augustine, I know he's on the back end of the church fathers. I mean, it's probably going to be Augustine.
Still counts, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Grace. He's my son's middle name is Augustine. After that, just because he's been so influential in my thinking, and I mean, he's not only huge with his defense of the Trinity and De Trinitate, but his fight against Pelagius and being the one to really solidify, because he holds in sola gratia. He doesn't hold to sola fide. He's still Catholic. We forget as Protestants that Augustine would burn us at the stake and that he's still very fervently Catholic. But he does hold to sola gratia. He does hold that it is by God's grace alone and you are depraved. And I think you get it through the sacraments and these kind of things in a Catholic sense, not in a Lutheran sense. But anyway, so probably him. Obviously, big fan of guys like Irenaeus for, defending Christology and these kind of things. I like a lot of the apologists because as a philosopher, I like that they don't just toss out what hath Athens to do with Jerusalem, a lot of the Justin Martyrs and stuff of the world that will defend using pagan philosophy for Christian purposes. All truth is God's truth. So I'm a fan of those guys. So you're asking, I mean, the Cappadocian Fathers are great. I mean, it just depends. But yeah, I mean, Augustine's he's my boy.
He's a universal choice, I think, in the West. So.
Oh, if you're in the part of the Western tradition, he's your guy. I mean, during the Reformation, one of the slogans at the University of Wittenberg was the Bible and St. Augustine. Think about that. When you are thrown in there with Scripture, that's crazy. I mean, to quote Augustine was like quoting the Scripture. And even for the Reformers, it's amazing how much they quote Augustine as an authority and then move on. And you're like, I thought you believed in sola scriptura. They do, but that's the influence that Augustine has. Yeah. And so it's massive.
So, favorite Puritan? Do you have a favorite?
Gosh, I don't. Okay, I'm going to say something crazy. For most of my pastoral life, that sounds weird. I haven't died yet. I was a big fan of the Puritans. Big fan. the older I get, the more mature I get in my theology, or immature I get in my theology, the less I like the Puritans because that legalistic strand. These are guys who think that it is improper to laugh on a Sunday. These are guys who won't let you do any sports that are competitive because that's vainglory, who won't let you give your wife a wedding ring, right? The Bible's clear. You're not supposed to wear jewelry and stuff to church. That's lavish. And so they, in Puritan New England, they would actually, a lot of times, I did a whole lesson on Puritanism when I went through all the laws that they have, what you could and couldn't do. And so a lot of times you couldn't give your wife a wedding ring. So what you would do is you'd give her a thimble as a symbol of her domestic duties, and the women would take it and grind it down and make it into a ring. And so there's too much legalism there for guys that talk a lot about grace. They don't live the grace. And so I'm not a huge fan of the Puritans because I think that their focus is on the wrong thing. Their theology is great and they're brilliant, and John Owen is amazing, and these kind of guys. I think it was Owen that had 11 kids and 10 of them died before they reached adulthood, and these kind of things. So they're heroes. So I'm not trying to, they're better than me. I'm more confident that they're saved than that I'm saved. I just don't like, their focus is everything that makes me want to, my skin crawl about Christianity. That's a strong statement. That's how I feel.
Gotcha. Well, we're Puritan haters.
Good.
On the Lutheran side, anyway. Good. You have a favorite modern theologian?
Yeah, that is broad. I'm a big Alistair McGrath fan. Another Anglican, just for a shout out. Alistair McGrath is probably my favorite mod. I got to meet him, which was really cool. He was super nice. And so he's probably my favorite. I like his approach because he's very level-headed. He very much approaches theology from a historical standpoint, which I think is wise. There is no Bible. There's only an interpretive Bible. So when you interpret the Bible, do you interpret it the way you want to with your modern assumptions, or do you interpret it the way Spirit-filled Christians have for the entirety of church history? And so I have a tendency to fall in that camp. And so he's probably my favorite. I like guys that are controversial. I like N.T. Wright. I don't agree with everything that he says because he says some bad stuff, but he also says some really good stuff. And his stuff on the resurrection is lights out. So anyway, I have guys that I like. I like Carl Trueman. I like, anyway, there's a lot of guys I do like, but Alistair McGrath is my modern day theologian.
Yeah.
So
what are you reading right now? What's on your list?
So I'm actually, this is going to be just some shameless self-promotion. I'm reading a lot of philosophers right now because I'm writing a second book. So my first one was Logic for Christians, which is really, a book on logic. It's a real page turner, use it as a doorstop. Makes a great stocking stuffer. Sold like 6 copies, I think. And, but it was logic from a Christian perspective and just kind of an intro. It's for lay people. Because I realized that when two Christians sit down and they talk about the Bible, they're not really talking about the Bible. They're talking about all their presuppositions and assumptions that they bring to the Bible. So to say it another way, let's pretend that the Bible's a white piece of paper. It's pure, it's clean, it's perfect, it's God's word. You're wearing glasses, though, that you can't take off. They're epoxied to your face. And maybe your glasses are blue and mine are red and someone else's are green, someone else's are yellow. And we're arguing over this white piece of paper. And we're arguing past each other, not because the problem is with the Bible, but the problem is with us and our glasses. So I wrote that book to say, let me teach Christians how to think logically. There's a way you can make an argument and write it out in math and know who won. Like a lot of times people are like, I think this is a good argument. I'm like, I don't care what you think. Let's prove it with math. Let's write it out in symbolic logic and see who's right. So I wrote that to help people just think. This other book that I'm writing is an intro to philosophy. So it's a much more ambitious project because we're going to deal with ethics and metaphysics and epistemology and politics and all these kind of things. But I also try to write it with less bias. So my book is pretty biased. It's written for Christians and it's written from a conservative slant. I mean that theologically as well as politically. This new one, I'm trying to be as unbiased as possible, which is impossible. You can't hide your biases completely, but I give proofs for God's existence and the arguments from, Hume and Sartre and all these other guys against it or whoever. And then I give arguments for this worldview versus this worldview. So I try to make it like that. So I've been reading primarily primary sources from a bunch of different guys just to make sure my research is excellent for that work. So I don't have a great, here's a great theological thing I've just read. Theologically, I did like recently The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self with Truman, and then he had Strange New World, which is a smaller cut-down version, because that kind of plays in both worlds. It plays in the theology world, primarily in the philosophy, how did we get here world, which he does a good job. I mean, he's a church historian by trade, so he messes up on little things, but most of it's good. So anyway, what about you?
Well, actually, I'm reading your book, Logic for Christians. I think
Shameless plug right there.
halfway through.
It'll change your life.
I tried to get through it, but then a new video game came out. Priorities.
Bro, listen, at the end, when you're on your deathbed, you will have wished that you spent more time playing that game than reading my book. I
Probably.
So, anyway.
Yeah, no, reading that, and then I've got a bunch on my list, but I'm going to try to get through The Case for Christian Nationalism, just to see what the hype is about, because everyone's saying that he's a racist. And I'm like, well, kind of says he's not, so I'd rather read the source and make my own conclusions.
Yeah.
And then Benedict Option by Rod Dreher, reading that right now too, which that got shelved, but I'll go back to it. I'm kind of doing a chapter at a time.
Yeah.
So
those are going to be in similar veins.
Yep.
That, and then Live Not by Lies from him is also going to be in that same kind of vein. It is trying to understand, with a society that is increasingly hating Christianity, how do you not disengage but create an alternate Christian society where you're still evangelizing, you're still in the world, but you're going to need backups.
Yep.
When your credit card gets canceled because you're a bigot at your church, how are people going to pay their tithe? Like there's this real palpable thing that's coming, has already started. So anyway,
yeah, no, I think there's a lot of parallels and a lot of crossover. I think,
yeah,
because even he wouldn't even say we disengage completely, but we build.
Correct.
We have to build positive society and that sort of thing. So yeah. Well, I really enjoyed this. Thanks for
having me. Thank you for
braving the bugs.
Yes, I braved the bugs and the storm, and just total courage out here. Thank you for the whiskey, cigars, and theology. Those are the best things. And for hanging out. Thanks for having me on, putting up with my nonsense.
Yeah, no, it's great. Thanks everyone for watching. If you enjoy the content, then please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with a friend who shares Zach's opinions on Luther. Until next time, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you his peace. I'll see you guys later.